With Amex, there's always a new experience to explore. From curating the perfect vacation and chilling in the Centurion Lounge before you get there, trying out that new trendy restaurant thanks to Priority Notify with global dining access by Resy, and getting straight to the action at the big game with card member entrances at select venues. With Amex Platinum, you can experience it all. That's the powerful backing of American Express. Terms apply. Access to the card member entrance not limited to the American Express Platinum Card. Learn more at americanexpress.com/withAmex.
Lowe's knows that taking on more projects should be rewarding. That's why loyalty members get more every day with rewards for every home or business purchase. Plus, shop weekly member deals and get access to free standard shipping. So what are you waiting for? Join free today. Lowe's, we help you save. Loyalty program subject to terms and conditions. Detail at lowes.com/terms, subject to change.
Elf Beauty is a huge success story. But did you know they believe their success is in part due to the diversity of their board? And the data backs them up. The Not So White paper, created in collaboration with North Carolina A&T, connects the dots between diverse corporate boards and positive results, which can include a higher return on equity, better price-to-earnings ratios, and even fewer discrimination lawsuits. Read it yourself at elfbeauty.com/notsowhitepaper.
This week on the Happy Half Hour.
Every GM dreams about having more stuff. If you've got 7 picks, you want 8. If you've got 8, you want 10. If you've got 9, you want 12. So if you can load up on stuff, if you could get somewhere between 8 and 57, I think that's something Dan Morgan absolutely would be interested in exploring.
Touchdown, Carolina!
It's time for the Happy Half Hour, presented by Southern Star, an official bourbon of the Carolina Panthers. Here are your hosts, Darin Gant and Kassidy Hill.
Hello, friends. We are back again. It is Thursday, April 17th. We are recording, let's call this your pre-draft bonanza episode.
A bonanza
of a happy half hour.
Bonanza.
I mean, and since we're celebrating, there's no other way. I mean, this episode of the Happy Half Hour is brought to you by our friends at Southern Star. Celebrate the spirit of the Carolinas. They are an official bourbon partner of your Carolina Panthers, and frankly, an official bourbon partner of Darin Gant right now. So maybe as soon as
Darin
we finish,
Gant is the spirit of the Carolinas.
That's right, something like that. Or the spirit of the Carolinas is inside of me.
There
How about
you
that?
go.
No, we got a lot. It's almost party time. We are 1 week out from when all this goes down, and we have got a lot to get through between now and then, honestly, because it's a week out. You know, most of the mock drafts have been done. Most of the work has been done. You and I have been putting stories in the can that are going to roll out days at a time in advance, and it's almost here. It's that time, and you're about to get on an airplane and go to Green Bay and be right there in the middle of it all.
Yeah, it sneaks up on you every year around this time too, and this is when everything changes or when everything can change for a team. It's very exciting. I've got to figure out, since we are getting on a plane on Wednesday. The team returns on Monday. You know, off-season programs kind of begin. I've got to figure out when I'm going to fit in my annual viewing of Draft Day. You know, it's not really the draft time until Kevin Costner writes on a Post-it note. So it's also Easter weekend. You know, it's going to be a busy time, but that's really important. Yeah,
mixing Easter in's always tricky. I
know who planned that.
Yeah, I've got deviled eggs to make before this weekend gets here. But you a big deviled egg person, by the way?
I am a big deviled egg person, but I don't like it when people put a lot of mustard in theirs.
You know, I think deviled egg might be my number one pick in the Easter food draft.
Really?
Yeah.
I can see that because it goes along with the whole egg thing too. Ham, if done right, is good, but it can be done wrong really, really easily.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think we usually have like baked beans, potato salad, macaroni and cheese, but deviled eggs are definitely up there.
Yeah, I'm definitely going deviled egg number one. I might trade up to acquire deviled egg, and I might trade down to acquire even more. My wife asked me the other day, she said, how many deviled eggs you plan on making? I was like, well, 2 dozen. She said, so like a dozen eggs? And I said, No,
2 dozen eggs. So that's 48 deviled eggs.
That's correct.
I can do that math.
Yeah,
I can do
she
deviled
was like,
eggs
how
math.
many people are going to be at your mom's house? And I said, 9 or 10, something like that.
Yeah.
Just a small gathering. And she was like, so 4 or 5. And I said, I need deviled eggs to be left over. I'm sitting here like Scrooge McDuck in my pool of gold.
You don't want them left over too much, though.
Buying 24 deviled eggs at a time. So anyway, we should talk about football because this is a football podcast. That's what they tell me.
It can be anything we want it to be.
You have got so you made this a tradition of watching draft day before every draft day?
It didn't really, I didn't mean for it to become a tradition. It just kind of did. I realized I was watching it because usually it'll be on TV around draft time as well. And then one year I couldn't find it on TV or I missed it and I couldn't find it on a streaming service. So I bought it on DVD. And now the past 2 or 3 years I've made sure to watch it. Usually that Wednesday night, the night before the draft. It just gets me excited. It gets me pumped. Because, I know the draft more than anything is a TV event at this point. Mm-hmm. But it is still, fun to kind of get into it and to, imagine what's actually going on in the rooms. I always want, I would love to be a fly on the wall in those rooms and find out, how many times each year there is really and David Putney, just for the heck of it, one of those moments. Have you ever seen and give me David Putney just for the heck of it moment? I'm paraphrasing because there's certain words I feel like we'd get fined for saying.
I feel like I am culturally aware of this movie without ever having sat through the entirety of it.
You've never watched Draft Day?
Not intentionally. I mean, I'm aware of the premise. I know the build up, and trust me, we got Scott Fitterer to hold up the Post-it note in the palm of his hand that said Bryce Young the other year. So we've done all that.
Darin, it is cheesy. It puts a Hollywood spin on football. There's an unnecessary love story. Mm-hmm. It is a fantastic movie.
Wow. It's I don't know, maybe
there are so many cultural references that can be made around draft time to the movie. And I do appreciate too that they didn't make up teams. Everybody in the NFL was completely on board with being it's really an NFL vehicle. But because everybody was on board, they filmed scenes at the actual draft. And, it's the commissioner, it's Roger Goodell walking out to read a name. And there's also just a moment in there where you just remind yourself that every year at the draft, this is somebody's lifelong dream coming true.
Well, and that's the key. And a lot's going to change for these individuals and teams in particular because we're going to do all the build-up. We have been doing the build-up. I was joking with some friends on a local radio station earlier this week. I said, maybe, just maybe we've started too soon. When we start doing mock drafts around Thanksgiving. That's probably a little early when we start thinking about draft position because it does. I mean, you always watch draft day. I always try to go into a dark room with no input whatsoever and just kind of veg for 5 minutes because I feel like I've been swimming in this pool for the last 4 months. But anyway, I mean, it's just with all of that build-up, there is an excitement. And I think for the Carolina Panthers, there's the realization that they have an opportunity coming up this week to really change this football team for the better. They've got 9 total picks, 8 in the first 5 rounds, including that sweet number 8 spot that gives them a lot of opportunities. I mean, there's been a lot of talk about this player, that player, but when you just look at having 8 picks in the first 5 rounds for a team that's looking to build on the talent and make those big strides on defense and continue to develop the roster as a whole, I think this weekend's big opportunity.
Anytime you have a top 10 pick, that's a potential franchise-chasing pick because you either are getting a top 10 talent or you're trading back and you're getting a lot of picks to build your team around. So you can really kind of control your own destiny when you're sitting there with a top 10 pick, especially when you have units that are as deep as they are this year, and you've got so many teams ahead of you that have very specific needs. That kind of puts you in a really, really good position if you're the Panthers at number 8 overall and knowing what you need.
Right. And listen, that Derek Carr news last week, when the Saints find out their starting quarterback's got a shoulder injury that may or may not preclude him from beginning this season or being able to play depending on whether he needs surgery or not. It's kind of gone dark since that early word. That's, put the Saints on everybody's radar in terms of quarterback. And, if you're in the top 10 or if you're on the fringes of the top 10 and you want to get a guy and everybody knows it, then they're probably going to be calling Dan Morgan to see what eight's worth to them. And, I think there are a lot of there are a lot of defensive players that they like, and we've talked about a lot of them at length here and abroad. Jalen Walker's name is attached to the Carolina Panthers in practically every mock draft, and there's a reason for that. Jalen Walker's really good at football. And it would be
he feels the need.
And it would be pretty easy to imagine him slotting right in here for his hometown team. He grew up right up the road in Salisbury. Cheerwine's not a sponsor, but we'll make an exception for one day to get Salisbury in the house. But I just think that if it's him, that makes a lot of sense. But there's a lot of different ways this could go. When we talked to Dan earlier this week at his annual pre-draft press conference, which is an exercise in trying to say anything revelatory.
Which he did very well at.
He did a great job. He got asked a lot, though, about the idea of trading back.
Right.
And as tempting as that top 10 impact player is, the idea of adding more stuff is appealing because through deals that were made before he became general manager, the Panthers got a big gap between 8 and 57.
Right.
That 39th pick that would have been theirs is still with Chicago. Mm-hmm. That's the remnant of the Bryce Young trade, the last thing that's hanging out there, keeping them from being whole. But they did get a late second from the Rams in a trade last year. So, I think it's natural, and every GM dreams about having more stuff. If you've got 7 picks, you want 8. If you got 8, you want 10. If you've got 9, you want 12. So if you can load up on stuff, if you could get somewhere between 8 and 57, I think that's something Dan Morgan absolutely would be interested in exploring.
And he bought himself a lot of flexibility with what they did in free agency. Mm-hmm. And he also has a little bit of flexibility considering, again, kind of just going back to this, considering what their positions of need are and how deep those particular classes are in this year's draft. Mm-hmm. Yes, you want the top 10 pick, and if you're sitting there, I think he said if we're there, like obviously we're gonna take somebody that's gonna be great. Mm-hmm. You've still got that game-changing talent that you could maybe get in the late teens, the 20s, with this particular edge rushing class, maybe even with this like safety class, the trenches, like. You've got some flexibility with this particular class and how it's unfolding this year, which may not be the case next year.
Right. And again, pass rushers are always a scarce commodity. Mm-hmm. And if you're the Carolina Panthers, yes, you've got DJ Wanham, Patrick Jones signed this offseason, Jadeveon Clowney's still here. You've got people, if you have a chance to add impact to that, that's something those guys get picked high for a reason.
Yeah.
I still remember a couple of years ago there was a pass rusher that they had their eyes on. They thought they were going to try to trade up into the late 20s and get, and he went in the middle of the first round. He went about 10, 12 spots higher than they were talking about trading to get to select him. So it's always a valued commodity. It will be again. But with so many guys at that position this year, that makes this kind of a rare draft, and it makes that idea of, okay, what if we're picking 16th? What if we're picking 20th? What if we're picking 21st? Can you still get guys that help this team? And I think with the makeup of this year's draft, the answer to that should be yes.
They're going to have to be careful with, though, too, is when you have a position like that, there are times that those players can be very scheme dependent. Mm-hmm. This defense runs a 3-4, which means you can also usually drop into a 4-3. Like you've got to make sure that you're not. And Dan Morgan knows this. I'm not telling him anything he doesn't know. You can't just grab an outside linebacker. You're going to need to grab, somebody that could be, a stand up, or it's not necessarily going to be a hand in the ground guy, although those exist too. Mm-hmm. And maybe it is. If you're going to get a hand in the ground guy, that kind of changes what your defense is going to look like. There is some scheme dependency that is still there within that class.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think even with that, you just got to think about impact. I mean, when you're thinking about the Carolina Panthers defense right now, you're not thinking good thoughts because it was 32nd in all the categories last year, gave up a league record, all-time league record, points allowed, second most yards allowed, third most rush yards allowed. What they need is people who are good at playing defensive football.
Yeah.
This guy right here, Derek Brown, he needs friends.
I wish y'all could see. I may post this picture.
Theater of the mind is happening right here. We've got Derek Brown on a stick here in the podcast studio. And once we put this bad boy on video, you'll be able to see all my friends. We've got props, and we're going to use them. But Derek Brown needs help.
Yes,
J.C. Horn needs help. You've got a couple of guys there, and those two, who are those culture builders? Who are those guys who set the tone for the entire defense? Now you need somebody at that second level, somebody who is that, choose your football cliche of preference, war daddy, whatever it happens to be. That was one that our friend Dave Canales used down at the and I just did the Dave Canales on a stick. If you're imagining
I really
this at
wish
home,
y'all could be seeing this puppet show that's
which
going on.
Which you should be. I'm having fun with this. Anytime you've got an opportunity to have Derek Brown on a stick, you should. But they need guys who can help create a new culture on that defense. And there's a story I'm in the middle of writing right now that'll go up on Panthers.com later this afternoon. The way they built the offensive line over the last couple of years kind of informs what they ought to be doing or want to be doing with defense, which is you put money in it at a certain point to raise the level. Then you're able to kind of fix a piece or two at a time by saying, okay, we know we've got to find a guy who's better than this guy. Or if we're trying to do this, is there anybody who's better than this guy? So I think getting to that point on defense is going to be easier because there aren't enough of those guys to go around. But J.C. Horn, Derek Brown need a friend. They need somebody to create a little pressure to help set the tone for what needs to be a significant turnaround.
And it could take a couple of years.
No doubt.
It will take a couple of years. Even with a top 10 pick, you're not going to change an entire defense with one pick.
This was not a one-year fix, and it never was going to be. I don't think anybody had that illusion when Dave Canales, Dan Morgan took over a year ago. And to see the kind of progress, I mean, when Dave was talking down at the owners' meeting and he said, listen, what we saw out of these guys second half of the year was enough to make us think there's something to build on.
Yeah.
So, that's why there's been a lot of clamoring for target for Bryce. And
where's your Bryce?
Where's my Bryce? Here's my Bryce. Would Bryce like a big pass-catching target in the first round? Sure he would. Would Bryce like to have somebody like a big old 6'4" volleyball playing Ted McMillan, who's a go-fetch receiver?
Volleyball playing.
That's right. He is a big jump and go get it guy. Was at Arizona, and could they use one of those guys? Of course they could. And if the right defensive player is not there and they don't trade down or something, I think that's a very real possibility at number 8. But I just keep coming back to that defense, and I keep thinking about how not great it was last year. When you give up 600 or when you give up 6 straight games to close the year of over 200 rushing yards allowed, that speaks to a problem. And, they did the things in free agency. They added linemen. They added Pat Jones. But they still need dudes. And so we'll see how that goes.
Do you do mock drafts to kind of figure out where you think it's going to lie?
I do. I think I'm like everybody else. I've been looking at mock drafts, thinking about mock drafts, mocking mock drafts for a long time. There seems to be some degree of consensus. When you look at the way this top 10 of this draft's going to go, I think there's a general expectation at this point that Cam Ward is going to be the number 1 pick going to Tennessee. Then you've got your Travis Hunters, your Abdul Carters. Many, many people believe that the New England Patriots love Will Campbell.
They need a tackle.
The tackle from LSU.
For Drake May's sake, they need a tackle.
Many people believe that he's a Mike Vrabel kind of guy, so that kind of blocks in those 4. And as you go through this thing, you hear all the same names. I mean, you're hearing that Jacksonville's got a brand new GM, brand new head coach, so there's a little bit of mystery. But that GM came from the Rams. So how do the Rams do business? They've generally, the last couple of years, found impact players in the defensive front 7 when they've got premium picks. So maybe the Jaguars go with Mason Graham, the big defensive lineman.
Right, I can see that.
Michigan. I mean, that has become the conventional wisdom. Okay, now you get to 5, and here comes the Raiders, and everybody wants to give them a running back or maybe a tackle.
Yeah.
And there's Genty, there's
Genty.
Mimbu.
Could also use a quarterback.
They could use a lot of things. But, I think that as you go through this thing, there's a consensus of at least that first 5.
Yeah.
And what happens in spots 6, 7 is going to have a huge impact on what happens here, because we were talking about Jalen Walker earlier, and there's been a ton of conversation about Jalen Walker here in Charlotte for the last little bit. Other teams like him too.
Right.
And so if the Jacksonville Jaguars decide to build that defensive front 7 around a guy like that instead of a defensive tackle, then maybe Mason Graham comes into play.
Right.
If the Raiders see the opportunity to find a guy like that to put with Max Crosby, it's like, oh, wow, okay.
Right.
Imagine what that could be like. And so while Walker has become the object of fascination for so many people, I don't know that we can safely assume that he's absolutely there.
Yeah, that's a good point. He could be off the board already. And then you really can kind of look at maybe trading back and dip it into a much bigger bucket, or like you said, going after one of those receivers. We did a video last week with Trevor Sikkema, the draft analyst from PFF. He put a name on my radar that I had heard of and I had looked at, but I had not looked at closely until he said it, and it's Ezeraku from Boston College.
I was going to say Donovan. Say his last name.
Ezeraku.
There you go.
He was second in the FBS last year with 16.5 sacks. I mean, we don't think about Boston College much unless it's really kind of in relation to Luke Kuechly,
I was going to say, I think about Boston College defensive players quite often.
Unless it's Kuechly. But this is a guy that's
okay here before.
He's big. He could stand to put on about 15, 20 pounds. That's something, you get around here with a bunch of Bojangles, and that can happen a little bit easier. He could stand to put on a little weight, but he's tall. He's lengthy. He has a killer swim move, and clearly it works. He's getting in the backfield 16.5 times.
No doubt. And there are a lot of those guys in this year's draft. I mean, when you're talking about, Dan talked the other day about liking production. I mean, and I think one of the things that amuses me that we do as a media is we take the most innocuous press conference of the year and try to extrapolate it into, that means.
You know what's funny is when he said that, I did extrapolate it, and I started thinking about who he could be talking about.
Right.
Because you look at a guy like Shamar Stewart, who has so much promise but so little production.
Right. I mean, Shamar Stewart's got all the testing numbers you'd ever want to see in a defensive end, outside linebacker, but he had 3 sacks in 3 years.
Right.
And that's not a lot. So I just think when Dan said, obviously you prefer guys who have had that kind of production, I think some people were probably crossing names off the list. I think that's probably premature, because if you get to a certain level, this still, when my friend Dave Canales here likes to talk about this team, he uses the word developmental an awful lot.
Right.
And there are good coaches here, on the defensive side of the ball on Avero's staff. And I mean, Dom Capers is like the godfather of 3-4 outside linebackers. He was here with Lamar Lathan and Kevin Green and had a lot of success in a lot of places with a lot of different guys. So could they coach up somebody who had those kind of measurables into that player? I like their chances. But, I would caution people against reading too much into any particular thing that falls out of a GM's mouth this week.
It's also important to remember they could be measuring production different than we do.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to look at a stat sheet. It's just in our nature. But these guys are watching hours upon hours of tape. And I'm again, and not just to narrow in on one guy, but for an example, Shamar Stewart.
Mm-hmm.
He said over and over, turn on the tape. You'll see how I affected the game even if I didn't get a sack. And so, what is Ajero Evero and Dan Morgan considering production that maybe a box score is not?
Mm-hmm.
And so, that's something to keep in mind as well.
Yep. There's going to be so much. And again, we're going to get locked in. We're going to talk about that first pick an awful lot. Having those 2 picks on Friday, 57 and 74, give them an opportunity to add guys to this team who can make a difference. I think if it goes defense early, I think there's a reasonable expectation they're still in the market for wide receiver.
Yeah.
In that second, third round area, one of those fourths is probably the shelf where you want to go get a guy like that. So we'll see how all this develops, but it's going to be a lot. And I want everybody to stay tuned. The amount of stuff we've got planned, the amount of stuff that's coming, we're going to have our live draft show the day of the draft. Check the Panthers YouTube channel. Check Panthers.com for that. We're going to have written pieces throughout the next 7 days. By the way, it's Jason Baker days away from the NFL draft. You're familiar with Jason Baker, right?
I feel like I need to be.
Jason Baker was, of course, the punter for your Carolina Panthers in the late 2000s, the late aughts to about 11.
Late aughts.
Yeah, from the late aughts to 11. He's the record holder for most punts in franchise history and was part of one of the great trades in Panthers history. He was one of two things acquired for one Sauerbrunn. So when they finally got Todd out of here. But it's it's all coming. We're going to have it covered. Panthers.com, our YouTube channel, throughout the day. We've just going to reach this point. You know what you do? You watch draft day every year to get ready for this. I practice not sleeping because these are long days.
You need to sleep to get your energy up.
Yeah, these are long days, and they're days full of content, but it's the exciting time of year because the next time we join you here on the Happy Half Hour, this team's going to look a lot different.
Yeah.
We are going to have a lot more to talk about. So until then, friends, watch your draft day, mock your mock drafts, and we'll see you in a week.
e.l.f. Beauty is a huge success story. But did you know they believe their success is in part due to the diversity of their board? And the data backs them up. The Not So White paper, created in collaboration with North Carolina A&T, connects the dots between diverse corporate boards and positive results, which can include a higher return on equity, better price-to-earnings ratios, and even fewer discrimination lawsuits. Read it yourself at elfbeauty.com/notsowhitepaper.